Okay, let's unpack this. We talk a lot about climate change,
Mhm.
rising seas, melting ice, bigger storms. But what about something, well, quieter? Something maybe even more fundamental? I mean, what's actually happening to the plants that feed us and the natural remedies so many people rely on?
That's a really important question. And yeah, it often gets lost in the bigger climate picture. Plants are incredibly sensitive, right, to their environment. So when that environment changes dramatically, their basic chemistry, their makeup, it can change too.
Exactly. And this deep dive, well, it takes us into this really fascinating paper. It reviews a whole pile of research on exactly this. How climate change stress impacts plants specifically, their nutritional value for us, and how potent they are as medicines. The numbers are pretty striking. The paper mentions a WHO stat, something like over 80% of people in developing countries. They rely mainly on medicinal plants for healthcare.
hmm Which really shows you how high the stakes are here. The paper, its goal was basically to pull together what the science says about how climate change hits the value of plants and also how plants actually respond to that stress, biologically speaking. And finally, what strategies might help them and us cope with it all.
Right. So our mission today is to dig into that research, understand what's happening when plants are under this climate pressure, and what the real world implications are for our food, for our medicine. Okay, let's get into it.
Agreed. And it really starts with understanding the basics of plant stress biology.
Okay, let's start there then. The core challenge,
Yeah.
plants under pressure. So what is plant stress biology exactly?
Well, you can think of it like the plant survival guide when things get tough.
Yeah.
It's the study of how they sense and react to conditions that are, let's say, less than ideal, things that push them out of their comfort zone. Unlike us, right? They can't just pack up and move somewhere nicer.
No, they're stuck dealing with it.
Yeah.
So the paper focuses on the main problems, the sort of bad guys driven by climate change. What does it highlight?
Yeah, the review mainly looks at three big ones. Stressors that are getting worse, more frequent because of climate change. First, drought, basically, not enough water. Then, temperature extremes, so damaging heat waves, but also sometimes weird cold snaps. And third, salinity. That's too much salt in the soil or water, often made worse by changing rain patterns or irrigation or even sea level rise near coasts.
Okay, so the plant's feeling the heat or thirst or saltiness, maybe all three. How does it react? The paper mentioned different levels of response, right? From things you can see to stuff happening deep inside.
Exactly. Plants have these complex defense systems built up over time. So first level, you've got physiological responses, the things you might actually notice. Maybe they grow less to save energy. They might wilt, trying to lose less water. Or they close their stomata, those tiny pores on the leaves for gas exchange.
Ah, right. Closing the pores saves water, but
But it cuts down CO2 intake. So less fuel for photosynthesis, less growth. It's a trade-off, definitely a survival tactic.
survival mode. Okay, but there's more going on inside biochemically.
Oh, absolutely. That's the next level. Biochemical responses. This is where the plant's internal chemistry really shifts gears. They start making special compounds like osmolytes to help manage water inside their cells. They produce stress hormones, kind of like internal alarm signals, and lots of antioxidants to fight off the cellular damage stress can cause. And they might make things like heat shock proteins, which help protect other vital proteins from getting wrecked, especially when it's hot. It's all about keeping things stable inside.
Wow. And it goes even deeper,
Yeah.
down to the genes.
Yes, that's the molecular level. Changes in gene expression. Plants can actually switch on specific genes they know help with drought or heat or salt tolerance. They might change how they move water or salts around internally using transport proteins. This is, a deeper, maybe more long-term adaptation to ongoing or expected stress.
That sounds incredibly complex. And I guess in the real world, plants don't usually get just one of these problems at a time.
You nailed it. That's one of the big challenges the paper points out. Compound stress. Out in a field or in a forest, plants often face drought and heat together, or maybe salt stress plus high temperatures. The paper says that understanding how plants deal with these combinations of stress, that's still a major gap in the research. The combined effect isn't just adding stress 1 plus stress 2, it can be way more complicated.
Okay, so plants are under pressure, responding on all these levels. Let's link this back to us. Impact number one the paper talks about, our food. The big worry is less nutritious food.
That's definitely one of the major findings pulled together in this review, yeah. Climate stress can seriously reduce the nutritional quality of a lot of the staple crops we depend on.
What kind of nutrients are we talking about? Is it the really essential stuff?
Yes, absolutely. The research points to potential drops in key micronutrients. Vitamins, minerals, things like zinc, iron, vitamin A are specifically mentioned as potentially affected. Antioxidant levels can go down too. And really importantly for many people, protein levels in grains can take a hit.
Wow. That could have huge knock-on effects for nutrition globally, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Especially where diets are already borderline. Does the review give specific examples?
It does. It pulls from studies on various crops. It mentions that higher temperatures and also higher atmospheric CO2, another climate change factor, seem linked to lower nutrient density in some key crops. The paper looked at findings for things like cereals, potatoes, cabbages, onions, showing their makeup can change. For instance, drought stress. It's been shown to really hurt the nutritional quality of common beans in Africa, and beans are a critical protein source there.
So drought hits bean protein. What about heat? Does that do something similar?
Yeah, heat stress specifically seems to mess with the plant's ability to make certain nutrients and antioxidants, particularly in many vegetable crops. So yeah, whether it's too little water or too much heat, the nutritional value can definitely suffer.
No. Well, it's a pretty concerning picture for our food supply under climate change. But you mentioned something earlier, or rather, the paper mentioned something counterintuitive. Salt eustress. What's that about?
Ah, yes, this is where it gets really interesting. So generally, high salt levels are bad for most plants, right? Toxic. But the paper highlights research showing that for some plants, a moderate amount of salt stress can actually boost certain good things.
Boost them. How? Like make them more nutritious.
Kind of, yeah. In certain species, like Amaranthus tricolor, they found moderate salt stress actually increased the levels of some nutrients and antioxidants.
Yeah.
This idea of eustress, it suggests that a little bit of challenge, within the plant's tolerance limit can sometimes kick beneficial chemical pathways into higher gear instead of just causing damage. It's a fascinating twist, and a reminder that plant responses aren't always simple good-bad scenarios.
Huh. That definitely adds a layer of complexity.
Yeah.
So usually stress, bad for nutrition, but sometimes just the right amount of a specific stress might actually be good. Food for thought, definitely.
For sure.
Okay, let's pivot to the other big impact. Medicine. You mentioned that huge global reliance on medicinal plants earlier.
Right. Billions of people depend on these plants for their basic healthcare needs. They're not just, old traditions. They're vital sources of actual therapeutic compounds.
And climate stress messes with their medicinal value too. How does that work? Is it similar to the food issue?
It follows a pretty similar logic, yes.
That.
It's all about changing the plant's chemistry, the healing properties of medicinal plants. They come from specific chemical compounds, often called secondary metabolites. Things like alkaloids, flavonoids, essential oils, the stuff that gives plants their antimicrobial power or anti-inflammatory effects or antioxidant benefits.
The active ingredients, basically.
Exactly. So climate stress, changes in temperature, water, CO2, can really alter how the plant produces these secondary metabolites. Maybe it makes more of one compound, less of another, or the whole ratio of different compounds might shift.
And the consequence for people using these medicines.
Well, the critical outcome is that these changes in the chemical makeup can reduce the potency, the effectiveness of the herbal medicines made from them. The traditional remedy might just not work as well, or its effects could be unpredictable, and that poses real risks for people relying on it.
Does the review give examples of this actually happening?
It does, yeah. It points to research on Aconitum species in the Himalayas. They're important in traditional medicine there. Rising temperatures and weird rain patterns seem to be negatively affecting their chemical profiles. Another one is Mentha pulegium L. pennyroyal. Temperature changes directly impact how much essential oil you get from it and the quality of that oil. And Salvia militariza used a lot in Chinese medicine, where its active ingredients are found geographically. That's strongly controlled by climate conditions.
So climate change isn't just messing with the plant's internal chemistry. It could also change where you can even find these plants.
That's a really critical double whammy, yes. Climate change can shift where these medicinal plants can survive and thrive, might push them higher up mountains or towards the poles, or in some cases just shrink their habitat drastically. The paper mentions studies predicting some important species could become much harder to access in places like Egypt or the Nepal Himalaya. Losing that accessible habitat, that directly hits traditional healers, local communities, and even our ability to find new drugs from plants.
Wow. Okay, so we're potentially looking at less nutritious food, less potent medicine, and that medicine being harder to find. That's pretty serious. What does the paper say about, well, fighting back? Strategies for resilience. What can actually be done?
It's not all bad news. The paper does explore ways forward. First, remember what we talked about. Plants have their own built-in coping tools, right? Those physiological, biochemical, molecular responses. That's their natural kit. But yeah, humans definitely have a role to play too.
So what kinds of strategies does the review talk about?
Well, one key area is really valuing and integrating indigenous knowledge. Traditional communities, especially in places like Africa, they have generations of experience managing landscapes and plants to keep food and medicine available, even when conditions fluctuate. Things like conserving wild edible trees or using specific farming techniques, that's vital resilience right there.
Tapping into that deep local knowledge makes a ton of sense.
Okay.
What else?
Ecological restoration and conservation are huge. Bringing back and protecting diverse habitats, focusing on things like biodiversity, variety in the landscape makes whole ecosystems tougher, more resilient to climate shocks, and that directly helps the plants living there.
And the paper mentioned more formal planning too, even stuff in cities.
Yeah, it talks about the need for developing actual climate resilience frameworks, ways to integrate all this ecological health, social knowledge into planning, whether that's regional planning or even local stuff. It mentions examples like maybe cultivating medicinal plants in or near cities, cites Goa, India, as a place exploring how sustainable use can be part of the local landscape, making plants more accessible and resilient.
Interesting. And what about technology, like biotech?
The paper does touch on that. It acknowledges the potential of modern biotechnology and also selective breeding. The idea is to develop plant varieties that are naturally more stress tolerant, basically, engineering or breeding plants to hold on to their value even under tough conditions. It's presented as one possible tool in the toolbox, though it also notes, that approach isn't without its complexities, and some researchers are critical compared to focusing on ecological or traditional methods.
Right. So it sounds like a mix of approaches. Traditional wisdom, ecological health, maybe some tech assistance. There are paths forward, but sounds like there's still a lot we don't know. What limits or unknowns does the paper flag?
That's a really important part of the paper, actually pointing out where the research is still, thin. A huge challenge is just how much plants vary in their responses. Different species, even different types within the same species, can react totally differently to the same stress.
And you mentioned the complexity of multiple stressors hitting at once.
That's probably the biggest gap, yeah. Most studies, they're done in controlled labs looking at one stress at a time, nice and neat. But the real world, it's messy. It throws combinations at plants. Understanding how they cope with drought, plus heat, plus maybe poor soil, that's way harder to study, and we know much less about it. Makes predicting things really tricky.
So taking what you learned in a controlled lab experiment and applying it to, say, a real farm field or wild forest, that's a big jump.
It's a huge leap. Lab conditions take out all the other variables, different soil types, microbes, competition from weeds, pests, you name it. Translating those neat lab findings to the full complexity of a real ecosystem, that's a major hurdle for predicting how resilient plants will actually be.
And what about the long view, like chronic stress?
Yeah, there's uncertainty there too, about the long-term effects of ongoing stress. We might know a bit about how a plant handles a short heat wave or a brief drought, but what happens when it's under constant, maybe lower-level stress, season after season? Or even how that stress might affect the next generation of plants. We're still figuring that out.
Okay, so there's a lot of complexity, a lot of unknowns. Why should this matter to, someone listening who isn't a plant scientist?
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway?
Because, fundamentally, the health of plants is tied directly to our own health and our security. Simple as that. Understanding these impacts, it's crucial if we want to ensure the future of our food supply, its availability, its nutritional quality, and it's crucial for the effectiveness of natural medicines that, again, a huge part of the world relies on. It connects directly to global health, food security, and keeping traditional healthcare systems working.
And the paper's main conclusion is, basically, we need more research.
That's definitely a strong call coming from the paper, yes.
Right.
We need more in-depth studies, especially studies that tackle those multiple stressors together and try to bridge that gap between the lab and the real world. That's essential if we want to get better at predicting plant resilience and developing strategies that actually work on the ground.
Ultimately, the goal is to figure out how to help these plants not just, survive, but actually keep providing the value we need from them, even as the climate changes.
Exactly. Whether that means tweaking how we grow them, using ecological principles better, maybe exploring new varieties, the aim is to safeguard these absolute fundamental resources.
So wrapping up this deep dive, We've seen how climate change is putting serious pressure on the plants at the base of our food and medicine systems. It's altering their chemistry in ways that can reduce their value to us. Though sometimes, stress can have surprising effects too.
And yeah, this isn't just some abstract scientific problem. It has direct, potentially profound implications for billions of people, affecting nutrition, access to healthcare, especially in more vulnerable parts of the world.
Right. So, given all this complexity we talked about, the unknowns, and just how deeply we rely on plants, here's a thought to leave you with.
Hmm.
How do we best weave everything together? The ancient wisdom, the ecological understanding, the cutting-edge science, to help the plants that feed us and heal us not just survive, but actually thrive in the warmer world that's coming.
I also love these ones. Aren't they beautiful?